as we meet today, our economy is going great strides from a standpoint of, unemployment's at a 50-year low. The wages are increasing the fastest in 10 years, and we have more job openings than job seekers. And, that incredible turnaround's been, for the large part, by the hard work that we did going through with tax cuts and regulatory reform, trying to help focus on helping make those initiatives that we value move forward. But I think we can use some of that same logic, some of that same approach, addressing some of the issues we talk about, the environment and the climate. As a Kansan, Wichita is known as the air capital of the world. We do a lot of aerospace development, but also have a lot of agriculture within my district as well, and throughout the state. And I can tell you that there's no better stewards of the land and the environment than farmers and ranchers, because not only is that their livelihood, but that's also what they want to leave to their children and grandchildren as their legacy. And so, as we look at how can we move forward from here, how can we look at innovation, how can we look at regulatory changes to help make sure that we get the best practices for our climate. For too many years, the Democrat approach to climate change has been, how do we put in implementation ideas that actually would make energy more expensive? And now with the new policies around the Green New Deal proposal, obviously that's going to add trillions of dollars in cost in that process. And instead, I think we need to look at more clean energy opportunities. I talked about this in an op-ed that was published in The Hill this week, that America can't be alone in solving this problem. For example, the Paris Climate Accord would have restricted and greatly added to the cost and the burdens on American individuals and American companies without putting limits on China and India, who actually are putting more carbon into the environment now. We want to make sure that we don't implement a policy like some of the proposals in the Green New Deal that cost the $93 trillion, actually would take Treasury over 400 years to print that much money, and it affects every family to the tune of about $65,000 a year. So let's look at what do we do. U.S. emissions have been relatively flat since 1990s, while these emissions from China and India have skyrocketed. And I think what we need to look at is what kind of practices we can put in place, what kind of policies can we put in place to help export some of our innovation, some of the things we've done to some of these other countries. Mr. Powell, one of the things, I guess what I'd like to talk a little bit about is what do you think some of the best ways to reduce carbon emissions, and what should we do from a market standpoint to increase and make energy more efficient as opposed to some of the government mandated things?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for your fortitude and hanging on to the end of this fourth hour of this, and thank you all for that. You mentioned exports of our technologies, which I think is a critical part of this conversation that we haven't discussed much today. Leader Brady discussed his proposal to make sure that there are no outgoing tariff barriers on these technologies going to other countries, and I think that that's very important. I'd also note that y'all passed the BUILD Act last year, which establishes a new $60 billion authority under the Development Finance Corporation, which will evolve from the OPIC currently. And that authority could be an enormous tool for taking and deploying American clean energy technologies all across the developing world. That's good for our national security, because some of that could be technologies that are highly sensitive that we want to control around the world. That's great for our sort of global economic diplomacy, and it's great for emissions and energy access in a clean way around the developing world, which would also help global public health.
That's actually great. I think when we look at different options, I mean, one of the things I was able to see a couple of weeks ago, one of the companies that operates in my district, Occidental, is a partnership in a plan to develop a new electric generation facility that actually produces as much energy, but also captures the CO2 in the production process, so it doesn't have to be scrubbed out, and actually it becomes usable CO2 that they can actually then use to inject into the ground and either use in oil fields or that. One of the things, as we talk about some of that carbon capturing, can you talk a little bit, Mr. Powell, about the global carbon emissions from how that carbon capturing helps?
Absolutely. recognize I'm in the yellow. There is no more exciting technology in the world, I think, than that technology, the net power technology, which Occidental has invested in. Representative Schweikert showed a picture of that. It's a zero-emission natural gas power plant, which would be highly flexible and no more expensive than a traditional natural gas power plant.
Thank you, and I yield back.